The Scorched Plague is a mutagenic infection that ravaged Appalachia between 2085 and 2103, wiping out nearly all human life in the region, save for those sheltered within Vault 76. By 2103, through the efforts of the vault dwellers of Vault 76, the plague's inoculation had been distributed to nearly all Appalachians, including settlers, raiders, and the Brotherhood of Steel, halting the spread of the disease to humans. As of 2104, the plague still exists. The origins of the Scorched Plague begins with the Scorch Beast. Originally, what was once a typical bat was grotesquely mutated via the machinations of the Appalachian Enclave's biochemical experiments around 2083, deep below the Cranberry Bog. While containment of these creatures was far from successful, it would not be until 2086 that the megalomaniac aspirations of then Secretary of Agriculture turned President Thomas Eckhart unleashed the Scorch Beasts entirely on an unsuspecting Appalachia. In the early stages of these experiments, the bats appeared to have an uncanny ability to attract other animals. But the biochemical experiments were considered a failure. It was not until the bats were accidentally exposed to both biochemical agents and radiation that the Scorched Plague came to be. From a naturally secreted particulate falling from their wings, the Scorch Beasts spread this infection wherever they reached. Regardless if it were a human, animal, or mutant, the Scorched Plague was able to infect nearly every living thing it touched, with possible droplet methods of infection, with few exceptions. The plague starts with a series of intense physical changes in its victims. At first, the victim's skin will darken and smell of ash. Eventually, intense burning lesions begin to form all over the infected body, which would appear to be smoldering. After some time, the victim's skin will split open, exposing their reddish-pink flesh and the strange presence of green ultracite crystals that break up from beneath their skin. At this point, the infection has fully taken hold of its victim, transforming them into a scorched. Coupled with these physical changes is the degradation of the victim's mental faculties, more so if they are human. Most importantly, however, is their assimilation into the Scorch Beast's hive mind. As a Scorched, the victim is completely enthralled to the will of the hive mind, hostile to everything that is not already infected. In the case of Scorched humans, the assimilation into the hive mind is not completely absolute, as infected humans may demonstrate some awareness as to what state they're in. Physically, however, they have little to no ability to go against the greater whims. Every Scorched was a vector for greater infection, a purpose with which they are compelled to fulfill until they totally succumb to the disease within them and are left as nothing more a petrified ashen husk. Scorched humans made up the breadth of the Scorched Plague's victims. Most human Scorched are able to effectively utilize weaponry, including firearms. Fighting carriers of the Scorched Plague in and of itself was extremely dangerous, as transmission was a great risk, coupled with the then lack of any form of inoculation. Initial Scorch Beast sightings were often dismissed as rumors or hallucinations, but soon the various factions of Appalachia would be forced to assess the severity of the unstoppable plague. Many scrambled to develop means with which to combat the spread of the disease, developing a variety of countermeasures in an effort to destroy, contain, or even cure the plague. However, divisions and hostility would set in. Some dismissed the severity of the plague, others simply underestimated the threat and were too late to make a difference, or squabbling politics and mutual distrust between organizations would lead to the downfall of every major player in the region. In the end, despite the organized research capabilities of the responders, militarist might of the Brotherhood of Steel, survivalist pragmatism of the Free States, and reckless brutality of the Raiders, each of these once powerful factions would be snuffed out and destroyed, one by one, until all of Appalachia fell silent. Some were fortunate enough to flee the region before every human in Appalachia was either dead or scorched by the year 2103, that is, excluding the vault dwellers of Vault 76. The responders at Morgantown Airport first received word of the scorched threat from the Brotherhood of Steel and were able to rapidly develop an assortment of countermeasure against the plague. The formation of the fire breathers, along with the discovery of depleted ultracite munitions, allowed the responders to maintain a degree of control over the plague. Most important of the responders' research efforts under Dr. Claire Hudson was the early stages of a vaccination against the plague. However, circumstances halted the inoculation project just short of a successful vaccine. The Free States, operating within the mire, suffered the loss of Harper's Ferry to the Scorched beasts in the earliest stages of the plague in 2086. Though the environment of the mire and decentralized nature of the Free States allowed them some reprieve as they developed anti-scorch technology, such as the Scorched detection system and the Scorched beast lures. These technologies first allowed the Free States to track the presence of Scorched beasts and neutralize them. The fire breathers discovered that ultracite deposits become volatile when coming into contact with depleted ultracite. Using this information, they and the Appalachian Brotherhood of Steel created specialized weapons, such as receiver modifications and laser guns, to more effectively combat those infected. In addition, the research efforts of Dr. Claire Hudson made progress on the early stages of vaccination development, but were forced to abandon their work. Unable to combat the spread of the plague, some groups fled the region. Ultimately, the efforts of the responders, Brotherhood of Steel, Free States, and Raiders were unsuccessful, and their factions destroyed. In 2102, Vault 76 would finally open after 25 years, and the residents of the vault re-entered an Appalachia that has been devoid of all human life for years. Following the trail of the Overseer, the dwellers would discover what became of the region's factions, and were able to finish what the divided groups had started, finalizing the vaccine and inoculating themselves against the Scorched plague. The residents' efforts would culminate in utilizing the region's ICBM silos to launch a nuclear strike against Fisher Site Prime, and subsequently destroying the Scorched Beast Queen. What remained of the Appalachian Enclave would be instrumental in the destruction of the Scorched Beast threat, as navigating the automated promotion systems from within the White Spring bunker are what enabled the vault dwellers to access the region's nuclear payloads in the first place. A year later, in 2103, the Vault 76 Overseer and the dwellers began to manufacture vaccination for the plague, after settlers, raiders, and other groups began to return to the region. Later in the year, word of this inoculation would spread beyond Appalachia via caravans. Upon arrival in Appalachia, the Brotherhood 1st Expeditionary Force took the inoculation as well. A Scorched is created when a human, or other creature, comes in contact with a Scorched beast, as the mutated fungus-like plague called the Scorched plague that it carries mutates those infected. The skin goes through a rapid change from a charred black to blood-red lesions, as if they have been flayed alive. Complete loss of hair and cataracts of the eyes also occurs, and green ultracite crystals begin to protrude randomly from the skin. As well as affecting the appearance, those infected also succumb to complete degeneration of mental faculties. The infection of the Scorched plague essentially creates a hive mind that connects all Scorched to the Scorched Beast Queen. The Queen can then command these Scorched at will. The only instincts left for those infected are violent aggression towards everything but other Scorched. The plague has some inexplicable connection to the hyper-radioactive ore known as ultracite. The characteristic green crystals that penetrate from the flesh of the Scorched are ultracite crystals. When not acting violently or being directly controlled, a Scorched will enter its wandering state. This state is simply that. The Scorched wanders mindlessly around any given area, unless either ordered directly by the Queen, it finds a non-Scorched, or until it enters its statue state. The statue state is the beginning of the end for an infected Scorched, as the Scorched will stay in their statue position they are stuck in until they petrify from the inside out, leaving only a radioactive, petrified corpse. The petrified corpse is the delicate remains of any Scorched who has stayed in their statue state for too long. The corpse itself is ash-like with prominent veins of green ultracite visibly covering the petrified corpses, along with the remaining protrusions of ultracite crystals. The petrification process also destroys the clothing and weapons they had, but occasionally some possessions may survive the petrification. This means that all Scorched have a set lifespan until they inevitably succumb to their disease. The petrification process can take longer depending on the activity around any given area, as any disruption to a Scorched, while going through petrification, will awaken the Scorched and revert them back to their wandering state. Even in death, though, a Scorched's petrified corpse is a strong source of radiation to any unwise enough to disturb it. They wear tattered civilian wear, military uniforms, and faction outfits, such as the varied dress of the responders or armor of the raiders. Their vocalizations refer to themselves in the plural, with typical phrases being, "We are one," or "never alone." In 2103, following the elimination of the Scorchbeast Queen, and subsequent vaccination of the settlers and raiders who have returned to Appalachia, the Scorched influence on the region is in decline. Fixtures comprised of the dismembered corpses of Scorched are not uncommonly found mounted onto the walls of outposts and strongholds claimed by regional factions such as the Blood Eagles or the Cult of the Mothman. There are no known Scorched ghouls. Feral ghouls are known to be highly resistant to the Scorched plague.